Hello there, a very warm welcome to the program. I'm Nafisa Latic. The EU election results massively disrupted politics in several countries as the far-right parties managed to win a record number of seats in the next parliament. It is very likely that their presence at the heart of Europe will shake up blocs' future policies. And among Balkan countries that are part of the Union, conservative parties won the most of the seats in parliament in Slovenia, Croatia, Bulgaria and Romania. However, the results are closely watched by the Western Balkan countries as they are still looking to become EU members. So, will the next EU Parliament be open to enlargement? In this episode, we'll discuss how the rise of the far right will impact its relations with candidate countries. Adam Amunu starts our coverage.
It was a vote that could add uncertainty to Europe's future direction, as it looks like the far-right parties will take a record number of seats in the European Parliament. The election has already shaken the political landscape in Germany, Spain and France, where Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party winning 33% of the votes for France has sparked the dissolution of the French National Assembly and a snap election next month.
Nous voyons poindre l'aurore d'un nouveau jour pour toutes les nations et les peuples d'Europe. Nous l'accueillons avec optimisme et responsabilité. J'y vois une preuve de lucidité, de courage et d'indépendance, ces qualités si françaises qui seront dans l'avenir si indispensables au redressement du pays.
Conservative parties won in Balkan EU member countries, Slovenia, Croatia, Bulgaria and Romania. The rise of far-right parties could affect the most pressing policies for the region's future. Among them is the enlargement policy that is closely watched by 6 Balkan nations looking to join the EU. All 6 countries in the region, North Macedonia, Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia, Albania and Kosovo, have applied for EU membership, with varying degrees of progress. All countries but Kosovo have been given candidate status, but in most cases, negotiations to join have been stalled for years.
Úgy látom, hogy egyetértés van közöttünk abban, hogy az Európai Unió bővítése az sürgető feladat. Hiba, hogy Észak-Macedónia és Albánia számára ezt a lehetőséget most nem nyitottuk meg. De személy szerint ennél még nagyobb hibának tartanám, hogyha nem tudnánk fölgyorsítani a tárgyalásokat Szerbiával, mert a még Európai Unión kívül lévő része a Balkánnak a Szerbia fejlődése nélkül nem pacifikálható és nem stabilizálható. Ezért meggyőződésem az Európai Uniónak is az az érdeke, de a magyaroknak biztosan, hogy Szerbia minél hamarabb az Európai Unió tagja legyen.
A poll by the International Republican Institute shows a trend that Western Balkan countries are split between the West and Russia, and that support for EU accession is starting to wane. Although it shares a number of agenda items, Europe's far right disagrees on the question of enlarging the bloc. On one side are parties and leaders that defend the survival of the EU, but reject deeper integration among member states. This is the case with Hungary's Orbán or Italy's Giorgia Meloni. The other side are parties and leaders like Marine Le Pen that long for the effective dissolution of the EU overall and are therefore against any attempt to expand it. Adam Amunu, across the Balkans.
Joining me now from Belgrade is Aleksandra Tomanic, Executive Director of the European Fund for the Balkans, and from Skopje, Zoran Nechev. He is the head of EU Department at the Institute for Democracy, also Associate Fellow in German Council on Foreign Affairs. A very warm welcome to the program. I guess this is a question for both. How will the rise of far-right parties in EU Parliament impact EU's enlargement policy? Aleksandra, let me start with you.
I think that the expected earthquake did not happen. So we do see a rise, but it's according to the trend of the previous parliaments. The political groups of the far right and the extreme right have already been really big, and they're still growing. I think that the earthquakes did happen in some of the countries of Central and Western Europe, like the Netherlands, like Germany, like Austria, and like France, of course. So in Italy, we have seen that the Lega, the far-right Lega, has lost more than 20%, and that was gained by the Fratelli. So let's hope that that amount of far-right voters, it's not really an increase, it's more a shift. So luckily, we see a reverse trend in Hungary, in Poland, in some Scandinavian countries. So when you look at it, Europe is not really united, and we see some cyclical and some backdrawings from the far right in some countries, but unfortunately still towards the far right in others.
Zoran, I guess same question for you. As Alexandra mentioned, Europe is not united. So how will this impact their policies towards enlargement?
EU elections are not will not affect that much the accession process of the Western Balkan countries. What will, or what might affect more, is actually the after effects of the EU elections. So, you know, the dissolution of the parliament, for example, in France, that could, you know, and the possible coming in afterwards of, you know, in a couple of months period of Marine Le Pen, will directly influence, having in mind her stance on future enlargement. So I think that the focus should be on what kind of effects the EU election produce in certain countries, like, for example, France and also Germany. Not that much that the composition of the new European Parliament will affect that much, because as we have seen, you know, the right-wing surge is not as bad as we expected. Still, the centrist parties are there and will have the majority. So I think that not a lot will change when it comes to the Western Balkan accession after this European election.
And how will it impact particularly North Macedonia? Let's not forget that a while ago French President Macron blocked Albania and North Macedonia moving towards joining the EU. So what happens now if Marine Le Pen comes to power? And it seems like all the polls are predicting that that will be the case in France.
Yes, so well, you know what happened. President Macron thought that, you know, things would not move forward according to the old accession EU accession methodology, and there is a need to change the methodology. So we had now we have a new methodology, which, in my opinion, would need to change now that the whole let's say landscape when it comes to enlargement have changed with the accession negotiation, or with the decision to open accession negotiation with Ukraine and Moldova, and also having Georgia in mind. So I think that we will see again we will need to see kind of a change in the way that enlargement is being done, having in mind the whole geopolitical moment and the war the Russian war in Ukraine.
Having in mind the Russian war in Ukraine, Alexandra, how focused will the Brussels be on the Western Balkans in the coming months?
Well, I have to say I'm not that optimistic like Zoran. I think that the composition of the European Parliament, especially having in mind that those parliamentary groups that were on the side of certain values we all expect from the EU, like the Greens and the Liberals, have seen tremendous losses. So when you look at the past composition, at the past 5 years, it was these two political groups that were the motors of certain resolutions, of certain things that were important for democratic processes in the region, and these two in particular have lost a lot. So I'm very frightened how if we also lose the European Parliament as an institution for democratic values and processes in the region, then the question is what remains of enlargement and its initial idea of transforming and democratizing countries. The campaign was shaped by the far right, and especially with migration. Especially, I was following very closely Germany. There, the war in Ukraine was not the main priority. It was migration. And I think that in these countries where the far right had or won or become a strong second option, that these topics of the far right will also dominate. We already see that Albania has a migration deal with Italy. We also hear that Denmark is negotiating with Kosovo. So the question is what will be the contents of a very, very long process we are facing.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about the people. What do they want even anymore in the Western Balkans, as seems like these policies are yet to be implemented and we can expect more changes and possibly more weight for certain countries. Majority of the citizens in the Western Balkans would vote for EU membership. That's according to this latest poll by International Republican Institute. Only in Serbia that situation was different. That number was around 40%. How likely is that these numbers will change if the region continues to wait for Brussels to decide on its approach?
I guess that this question is for me. Well, in Serbia, you have, I mean, it's no news and no revolution when you say that here we have authoritarian tendencies and huge state capture and a captured media landscape. So in Serbia, there is no free media. And what happened here over the past 12 years, it's really measurable in numbers. Like when the former Radical Party transformed itself overnight into a pro-European party, the Serbian Progressive Party that is in power since 12 years, it was impossible to win elections without a clear EU agenda. Then they took power, they captured the state and the media, and you hardly can hear anything positive about the EU in state-controlled media, which is 95% of all media. And you can literally measure that from 80% of pro-European of a pro-European population and support for EU membership of 80% back in 2012 to below 40%. This is a direct and measurable result of the politics we are living here in the past decade and a bit. So this is really hardly ever you can really measure it, and you can hardly ever in clear numbers measure the impact of policies like you can do in Serbia today with exactly that indicator.
Zoran, I want to go back to North Macedonia here. I must say one of the most frustrated countries, as North Macedonia even changed the name and delivered many reforms and still is waiting for the bloc to continue with its membership process. But with the new government in Skopje and the new president already coming out and not respecting that agreement, and with these changes in Brussels, what is the future of Skopje's EU bid particularly?
Well, yeah, you know, we have been in this process for, well, almost 2 decades. And we have seen a lot of bilateral blockages. Somehow, during these years, the whole process of accession moved away from this like kind of a merit-based process. Or when you deliver reforms, then you will be rewarded or granted to move forward in the process, because we have seen so many blockages. You know, since the beginning, the blockage with Greece because of the name issue that has been resolved with the Prespa agreement, and now it's actually the questioning how both sides are actually implementing the Prespa agreement. However, you know, after the Prespa agreement, when the whole enlargement momentum kicked in the country, we have received, you know, another blockage, first by France and the Netherlands, and then afterwards by Bulgaria. And somehow this, you know, the moment that existed at that time somehow died. Now it's extremely difficult. To come back to the process itself when such a valuable time an effort has been lost. Let's see, how the new government will react. Anyways, we need to change the constitution. At least that's the obligation that we have taken upon ourselves, to change the constitution, to put the Bulgarians inside our constitution. And until that is not done, we cannot move in the process. So let's see how the new government will react and what kind of moves it will take. Anyways, what is important to be mentioned here is that the new government looks like that it will have 2/3 majority, which is necessary to change the constitution.
Alexandra, last question to you. Going back to EU election results, how significant for the Western Balkans is the fact that Ursula von der Leyen will stay in power and continue to govern?
Well, that we have to see. She still has to take the burden and to get really officially nominated by the heads of state and government, and she has to pass the European Parliament, which looks good both, but still, let's wait for the process. I mean, there have been already surprises along the way. What I think was really very dangerous and irresponsible politically in the past weeks, when it was not clear that she will have a democratic majority in the European Parliament, was her opening up and reaching out and like that normalizing the radical and far right, which I think at this stage is really dangerous. So it's a very dangerous opportunistic pragmatism, which in a crisis of values we are living, I can't really see any good in that. So we've seen, yeah.
Alexandra, Zoran, thank you both for being our guests and for this insightful conversation. Bulgaria's 6th vote in 3 years has delivered yet another fragmented parliament. The conservative GERB party won the most votes, but it will need at least 2 coalition partners to form a government. The Movement for Rights and Freedom Party, mainly representing Bulgaria's large ethnic Turkish minority, came in second with 15.89% of the votes. The pro-Western bloc, We Continue the Change, with 15.08%, was neck and neck for second place. Well, that leaves GERB to try to put together a government that can finally unlock the deadlock and move the country forward with reforms. Joining me now from Bucharest is Miruna Butnaru-Troncota. She's an analyst in EU foreign and security policy. Miruna, great to see you again. We have mentioned there conservatives winning the European elections in most of the Balkan countries that are EU members, of course. What is the message that regions sent following these elections?
At least when it comes to Romania and Bulgaria, I think the message is a bit contrasting, because in the case of Bulgaria, we have a very low turnout, a very big political apathy, a lot of fragmentation of the political spectrum, a comeback of the former prime minister, the populist prime minister Boyko Borisov, whereas in the case of Romania, Romania becomes one of the first 4 countries in the EU that have the winning coalition, the governing coalition between the Liberals and the Social Democrats, winning the election with an important percentage, gaining 19 seats in the European Parliament. But at the same time also we have an increase in votes for the extreme far-right parties. AUR and another smaller party that sends 2 deputies in the European Parliament. This means a strengthening of the far-right movements in Romania, and for the first time we have such a big delegation of far-right representatives in the European Parliament. But I would say that our political landscape is not as polarized and fragmented as the one in Bulgaria, that is confronted with huge political crisis for many months, and we are maybe, there are some analysts speculating that we might have another round of snap elections by the end of this year in Bulgaria.
Right, I'll come to Bulgaria a bit later. I want to pick up where you mentioned that Romania is sending the far-right politicians in EU Parliament for the first time ever, although the Alliance for the Union of Romanians, our, that you mentioned as well, they had lower than expected vote we predicted much higher results for them. What do you think made the biggest impact on the voters in Romania?
I need to also start with an observation, the fact that there was almost no political discussion about EU elections. There were no debates, political debates. It was like EU didn't exist. Everything concentrated on local politics, local elections, because as you may know, Romania had two elections put together, local elections for the mayors and European elections. And unfortunately, there was not a lot of public attention on what does it mean for the next mandate of the European Parliament. What is the power of the MEPs that we send to Brussels? So I would say that from this point of view, many of the voters have concentrated on local elections and they just supported their parties without having in mind a European agenda. And I would say that might be a bit troubling, right? Especially when we see a lot of the diaspora from the United Kingdom, from Italy, from Spain, where there is the biggest Romanian diaspora, voting for the far-right extremist party that had very open anti-EU positions, that have expressed opinions against Romania's support for Ukraine, positions which of course do not represent Romania's overall position or overall society. And I would say that might be very problematic because these representatives, altogether, there are around 6 mandates for our and 2 more mandates for another far-right party of Diana Șoșoacă, who is someone who was part, an irredentist faction of our. So in total, 8 deputies that will have Eurosceptic stances representing Romania in the European Parliament. And this is something that Romania experiences for the first time. Of course, we have an explanation for that. First of all, I would say is part of the disinformation campaigns used by these political parties in order to criticize, of course, the government and to criticize EU for imposing its will on Romania and so on. And unfortunately, this type of populist debates are very easy to convince, to mobilize voters, because everything is targeted against the foreigners who are to be blamed for our own problems, the migrants, right. And so on. So unfortunately, voters are very vulnerable when they are not informed about how EU really works.
Miruna, going back to situation in Bulgaria that is very, very complicated. So GERB needs 2 more parties to make a coalition. How likely is that they will achieve this time, or the country might end up conducting yet, I think, 7th vote in 3 years?
Yes, the situation is very complicated. The results of this vote produced another fragmented parliament in Bulgaria, which most likely will be unable to end such a long-running period of political turmoil. Many observers actually are predicting snap parliamentary elections later this year. So even though GERB party, led by the former Prime Minister Boyko Borisov, won the elections, it needs at least 2 partners to form a governing coalition. And this is highly problematic because the other parties, the other right-wingers, for example, the Turkish Movement for Rights and Freedoms Party that came on the 2nd position, are still not very open for negotiations. So unfortunately, the pro-Western reformist bloc led by the We Continue the Change party won only 15% of the votes, and they are unlikely to form a coalition with GERB. So because of this fragmentation, first of all, there is a lot of uncertainty, and second of all, there is a high probability to have a new round of snap elections.
Miruna, thank you so much for this excellent analysis of the situation in Bulgaria and Romania. Thank you again. Former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair received a warm welcome this week in Pristina as Kosovo celebrated the 25th anniversary of the withdrawal of Serbian forces following a NATO bombing campaign. Well, this opened the way for its independence 9 years later. As Prime Minister of Britain, Blair was one of the most vocal supporters of NATO's intervention. Blair said he never regretted helping Kosovo gain its freedom. He also met 5 Tony Blairs. Tony Blair is a male given name in Kosovo to honor Tony Blair and his role in the NATO air campaign against Serbia. Many in Kosovo see him as instrumental in ending the conflict, and boys born after the war were sometimes named Tony or Tony Blair. And here they are, taking a photo with the President of Kosovo, Vjosa Osmani, and former UK Prime Minister, all 5 of them. That's it for this week. See you next time. Bye-bye for now.